Okay, with Michael Crosby, we're going to talk about the Fed now. We're also going to be talking about mass modeling economics. And we're going to be talking about what the future of the Fed is. Is there going to still end up being a Fed? Because there's a lot of other activity going. We got a lot of people that are going with crypto, a lot of people going with a lot of ideas on tokens, NFTs, a lot of other new forms of items that people are holding more belief in the solidity, the stability of different ideas, which basically, if it's currency, it's one thing. If it's crypto, it's another. If it's crypto, you're talking about mathematics. Everything basically is based upon a mathematical lock. And the confidence in that lock and the ability that that lock can be completely decentralized, yet 100% mobile, and virtually, in some cases, untraceable. So we have the new coming idea, some people would call it a threat, that Bitcoin, that crypto, that tokens, that all these different ideas are going to be coming up as the new investment conduits that are solid, secure, and mobile. If there's ever a war, a lot of people like this. If there's ever a war, it's like, hey, my crypto goes everywhere. My crypto is decentralized, and it's kind of sort of everywhere. So you can have big, huge wars occur, and as long as the entire planet isn't destroyed, in theory, you can get to your crypto. So a lot of people like this idea, but there are still items that are lacking or different about Bitcoin, cryptos, tokens, etc. Now you have people utilizing them for business startups. You have them doing it as though it's a form of stock. You also have them doing it as a nonprofit staking, which can be converted to for-profit. The intent of being a nonprofit, converting to a for-profit. So you've got a lot of things on the table on where these things are and where they can go. So when we're tracking back and we're considering, the Fed, what's going to be happening with the Fed, there are additional problems that need to be looked at concerning the Fed. The Fed has liability problems. And this is something that's interesting that I don't think a lot of people understand. The Fed has enormous liability problems. So if you're utilizing unbiased AI to evaluate the Fed, there are tremendous problems. If you can imagine lawsuits being brought that would stand to bankrupt the entire Fed or have the Fed itself seized as part of a RICO indictment. This is a tremendous threat that AI evaluating it says it would seem at the moment on the course that we're on that it would be as though imminent that the Fed will end. Now the problem with this is that you have creative human factors which come up with new answers that currently, with certain types of AI estimation, has to be taken into account. Depends on various styles of arguments of what can be done. It's a more limited style of AI mass understanding estimations. There are other types of mass AI estimations that are based upon different factors that are far more solid. But the course currently for the Fed does not look good. It looks like the Fed's going to end up getting seized as a RICO situation. And there's a lot of people that go, what? What? How could, but it's what? Okay, here we go. Let's go for a ride here. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because, nobody's necessarily paying me to dig into this other research, so I have all these other priorities I really need to take care of. But basically, for instance, the Fed recently does activity and it raises rates. And the effect ends up affecting a lot of poor people, which means the availability of money went up and they have to pay far more money for a loan. Yet the Fed is doing this to tame inflation. So you have various people making arguments saying, wait a minute, you're saying you have to tame. Yes, it's a problem. So you have to take an action. This is an admitted manifestation concerning an actual problem situation. This is evidence. So someone says, okay, well, wait a minute. Isn't this kind of like sort of due to the greed factors? And, you'll hear a lot of colorful responses. Says, well, we're taking this action to deal with that. Here's the problem. The problem is that the arguments concerning the greed factor items show that there's entirely large areas of people who had nothing to do with the greed factor. For instance, among these, you could argue that people with an income of $500,000 a year, or, people with an overall asset holding or valuation of $500,000 had nothing to do with it. People with an income of $500,000 a year are considered contributors by some. Now let's change this back into another set of statistics. People who have an overall valuation of $200,000 that basically would be deemed pretty much absolutely not in the category. The rarity of it is astronomical. Not that someplace in there isn't somebody that invested into something or whatever. But it's basically essentially not there. Now, if you also look at people with a $200K a year income, kind of sort of a lot of these people are barely not there in the participation, understanding of the greed problem factor. So beyond this, you start going into completely different understanding. When you go to the 100K income a year and or 100K assets or any variant previously discussed of a hard asset holding, the 100K asset is like completely zeroed out. And you go down to 60,000, there's just no space. There's like nobody making $60,000 a year that somehow is a participator in the greed factor. If you continue with your graphing and charting, you're looking at different income zones. You can go jump all the way down to burger flipper, and now you're getting into the territory. When you go below 100K, you're dramatically increasing a whole nother set of charts and figures that deal with people who have bankable labor, but it's not being banked and realized, who are being underutilized, completely underutilized, that would be way more efficient creating hard assets. It's massive. It's just incredibly massive to understand these different factors. So you could just say, let's just brushstroke this and call these people poor people. And basically, poor people had nothing to do with the greed factors, where the Fed turns around and says, yeah, we have to raise interest rates to tame this. But the Fed has a lot of computers and understands where these zones and factors are far more than they're, in my view, disclosing to the public. So the liability factor problem here is large. It's massive, because they didn't say we're raising interest rates. Oh, by the way, poor people are exempt, because clearly they were never part of the problem, which means a different adjusted rate opportunity. In other words, burger flippers should have been able to go to the bank and say, I want to borrow money to build a new home. And they should not be forced to pay the increased rate, because the increased rate is a solution to tame the problem. This means these people intentionally are inventing a mass layoff This is something done for, in the context is a bookie context. Too many bets come in, so they're going to lay off the bets in different areas. So they're going to distribute this. So, basically the Fed wanted a mass appeal forum to charge everybody for something that only a minority faction was responsible for. And they know that it's a minority faction. And they know that there's clearly ways to identify people that had nothing whatsoever to do with the minority faction. But they didn't do that. Which means that they discriminated. They unfairly put forth extra charges upon people who were not responsible, causing problems and hardship. That's wrong, basically. It's wrong. They actually are aiding and abetting greed factor forces and destabilizing people in poverty. This is a form of mass economic sabotage. It's defined by the Constitution as a mandatory death penalty area. It is defined by something of the Constitution that is never, ever allowable. It's all based upon this is an intentional action taken by the parties, fully intentionally, who are supposedly of superior knowledge, with superior capabilities and accesses. Okay, another example is literally you have other territorial areas where other people could come in and say, I have everything that I do completely traced with what it is I do. I've got all of these reinforcement programs that I utilize. I can show privately to the banker and say, look, this is everything that I've involved myself in. I have not involved myself in anything that is touching any of the factors that the Fed used in their decision, coming to this conclusion over actions they'd have to do to take to tame things. So therefore, why are they charging me extra money? That's discrimination. They're liable. I believe they're liable for that. So, there's just a couple of the arguments that basically you have an ironclad layout to prove that the Fed is breaking the law, that the Fed is intentionally charging other people for a different situational problem that they're identifying, that they understand about the sourcing quite well and good. So this is an important factor. At the moment, I don't have much time today to go into all the deep intricacies, only to say that AI is just an incredible legal stripping agent. It can just take a look at all these different actions and sit there and go, and you just violated this constitutional item, boom, you violated this other one. By the way, you're committing this and mass economic sabotage. You're in death penalty territory many times over. These people are conspiring to destroy the economy of the United States. And they're grossly, what they're saying is all BS. It has nothing to do with reality. It doesn't equate out. It doesn't model out. It doesn't tactical table out. So that's the new reality coming in. And there's just so many people that are basically very disgusted and frustrated with the way the Fed was been working. And they've been wanting a reasonable reality and overhaul for a very long time to wake up and understand things, So this puts an entire different understanding of cause and effect trust realities of why is the Fed committing mass economic sabotage and guilty of territory that has mandatory death penalty areas when you have when they're harassing and putting unfair transactional by the transaction charges on people that are dealing with a liquid conversion changeover or a crypto or something else, an NFT handling or whatever, instead of there's no individual mass cost charges repeatedly to transaction respective to stocks. You add it up yearly and then you pay your tax based upon profits. So, there's some of these areas that have been destroyed by various government practices where you have actions put on where they put a 2.5% transaction per transaction. So how can you keep trading it like you would trade stock? Because if you basically trade it, trade it 10 times, that's 25% of its value. If you trade it 40 times, you've eliminated 100% of its value. This is lunacy. This is a greed factor beyond factor. So here you have the government responsible for the greed factor problem because they're the ones implementing it. These are incredible arguments that AI can pull out and show firsthand and say, look at this lunacy. The lunacy is that they're creating the problem that they're claiming they're trying to solve. Mass madness. This is such a tactical table violation. It's mind-boggling. Does not model out well at all. And people are looking at going to jail because of the discrimination factor. There's other laws that have been violated. They're saying, well, we've decided that this law is... No. There's these other laws that can never be removed from the books that says you can't do it. Ever. You can't remove them from the books. You can't deem these items archaic. You can't utter for their removal. So this is a big factor that we have this massive breakdown in decency and a massive breakdown in competence. These people, a greed factor, as I've talked in other episodes, involving showing how you're borrowing money for a $210,000 new construction of a home that will be worth $300,000. You're borrowing the money, but the government's going to print $420,000 free and clear, and still mismanage this money. The mismanagement is massive. And again, AI just catches this stuff so fast, it's mind-boggling. So we have to do a major overhaul. So that's one of the reasons that I've been working on mass modeling for so many decades, to understand how it has to work properly and have fair, forward-moving and lean down and get rid of the fat type economies, as well as eliminating the liability problems, and big, that basically puts us into the restoring confidence factor. And there's, that's what a lot of people want. They want their confidence restored. They don't want to listen to a bunch of people who have nothing to do with hard asset development. They're not doing the labor. They're not doing the work. They're not doing the research. And they're just charging endlessly. And people want it to stop. They want some of these people put in jail. They want it over with. They want it to end. They want to bring the lunacy, the incompetence to an end. So that is something that comes around, and the Fed, notwithstanding certain major changes that theoretically possibly could, the Fed's days are numbered. The Fed is going to come to an end because it's not going to be able to withstand the enormous amount of lawsuits that'll be coming against it for mass discrimination. So there's that. So that, I hope, resolves a viewpoint that's current. I also lay out the possibility of variances that are unforeseen that could occur. I know about some of the options, but that's a lot more work. But I don't see anybody in the Fed moving towards any of these practical options to be able to try to make deals, to try to be reasonable. I just don't see it. So that explains that territorial interest and the application and research on how it applies to true law logic with AI and mass modeling. Michael Crosby, thank you for your time, I say.